just please maybe fly back to Chicago, help me pack up the house, and then, drag me back in my car. I don't want to drive, 1,000 miles to New York. I don't feel safe doing that. So I agreed to do that. I took a leave of absence from my work for a week, flew back to Chicago. And so here's Mom getting ready to move. She's turning over a new leaf, and she's so cheerful, like she's so happy. And for me, I can kind of see what might be around the corner. I'm feeling, my heart's kind of breaking, thinking, Mom's happy, but she doesn't know what she might have to deal with pretty soon. But I was also a little bit troubled because when Mom was cleaning things out, she was moving from a house to an apartment, and she had to, get rid of a lot of stuff, and she was ruthless. I mean, she's throwing stuff out left and right, including like some things that I thought might be evidence, things that had belonged to Ted at one time. So I actually made an excuse. I snuck out of the house. I called my contact at the FBI, and I said, Mom's throwing out lots of stuff. What do you want me to do? You want me to try to save it to the side? I mean, I don't want her to throw out evidence. And they said, David, don't worry. Just make sure all of that stuff gets into the garbage. We'll get the garbage. I said, okay, I guess this is how it works. I told him the garbage day was Tuesday. Around Monday afternoon, Mom comes back into the house. She'd been putting something out in the garbage, and she said, Dave, something really strange happened. I says, what? She says, I think somebody stole our garbage. And I'm thinking, I told him it was Tuesday. What's wrong with these people? And I said, Mom, it's probably just somebody scavenging for cans or old papers. And she said, well, yeah, but I read this article about identity theft. There are criminals going around getting in your garbage, finding your identity, getting into your bank accounts, etc., etc. I think I better call the police. And I said, Mom, please, I think you're overreacting, but Mom's stubborn. She called the police. So within like an hour, here's a uniformed town cop in our living room. Has no idea, of course, about the FBI and what they're up to. And they're taking a report from the little old lady who thinks somebody stole her garbage. And at one point, the officer looked at me and said, sir, do you have any idea who might have taken your mother's garbage? And I said, no. At the time, I felt intensely uncomfortable, as you can imagine. I didn't want Mom to guess what was going on. But sometimes I thought back, what if I'd said, yeah, I'm pretty sure the FBI took the garbage? You probably would have thought this is like one pretty screwy family. Drove Mom back to Chicago, to Schenectady. And a couple days after we arrived there, I got the call that I'd really been dreading. The FBI agent whom we'd been working with most closely called me and said, David, I'm sorry to have to tell you this. We've done everything possible to rule out your brother as a suspect. Unfortunately, he's moved to the top of our suspect list. We're really at a place in the investigation where we need to interview your mother. Do you think you could arrange a meeting for us? So here I am, I'm saying, well, look, she's just moved. Can't you give her a little bit more time? And they said, no, we really have to move forward. We have to do it, we give you 3 days maybe, but then we really need you to approach your mom. So I remember it was on a Saturday morning. I was walking up the steps to Mom's apartment. I knock on her door. She opens the door. She's kind of expecting me. She has a smile on her face, but I see her smile, turn to a look of dismay. She says, David, you look terrible. Did something happen? And I said, Mom, I think you better sit down. Something I need to explain to you. And whether it was the years of worry about Ted or a mother's intuition, she just said, is it Ted? Did something happen to Ted? Oh my God, tell me, David. And I said, Mom, as far as I know, Ted is in good health. But I do have something that I need to explain to you. It's going to take a little while. Please sit down. So Mom sat in this little lazy boy chair. I always remember her sitting in this chair, watching television, reading a book. That was like her favorite spot. And I was just much too agitated to sit down. I was kind of pacing the living room floor back and forth and thinking, how can I drop this terrible news on Mom without crushing her? Is there some painless way to do it? And of course, there was no painless way. I started talking about the Unabomber case, and she didn't know much about it, but I talked about the places the Unabomber had been. Then I talked about places Ted had been. Then I talked about, the Unabomber's manifesto, and then Ted's, preoccupation with technology. And Mom got very, very quiet. She just sat in that chair, not saying a word. But obviously she was connecting the dots. She saw where this was going. She was just kind of gazing at me with this fixed look of horror on her face. I knew that Mom loved Ted with all her heart. I knew that she loved me with all her heart. What I couldn't figure out is, how does a mother put this together? How does she deal with what I'm going to tell her? And, is she still going to love me when I tell her what I've done, that I've actually turned in my brother to the authorities on suspicion of murder? Anyway, I got to the end of the story. I said, Mom, I'm really concerned. I'm really kind of frightened, I don't know. I hope and pray that Ted's not the Unabomber, but I'm concerned enough, Mom, that I've actually gone to the FBI. I've shared my suspicions with them. They're currently investigating Ted to see if he might be the Unabomber. And I'll never forget what Mom did next. I guess there's certain defining moments in a person's life, revealing moments at least. Linda and I had the luxury of time. We could kind of think through our dilemma. I mean, it didn't seem to help. In some sense, for us, it was like watching a car wreck in slow motion and being unable to do anything about it. But for Mom, this was just sprung on her. I mean, she had to react, Anyway, when I said that, she got up out of her chair. And she's a very small woman, under 5 feet tall. And she just walked up to me quietly, reached her arms up around my neck, and pulled me down and put a kiss on my cheek. And the first thing she said was, David, I can't imagine what you've been struggling with. Amazing to me that in this most awful moment of her life, her primary concern was for me. I suppose some moms are like that. And then the next thing she said was probably the most comforting thing I could have heard. She said, David, I know that you love Ted. I know that you wouldn't have done this unless you felt like you had to. And with those words, I realized that I hadn't lost her love, that now Linda, Mom, and I would sort of face this ordeal together. But Mom was about where I had been when Linda first approached me. I mean, her first thought is, but David, Ted has never been violent. I mean, he loves animals. I mean, he has this kind of soft spot for vulnerable people and children. There's no way in the world that he could do what the Unabomber's done. You know what? They're going to investigate this. They're going to find out that he's completely innocent, and all of this is going to go away like a bad dream. Here she is still trying to comfort me. And I said, Mom, I really hope you're right. There's something else I have to tell you. The FBI's interested in speaking with you about this. Would you be willing to do that? And she says, well, if you think I should, I'll do it. And then I said, Mom, they're actually waiting outside. You can imagine how her life has just done a 180 turn in just the matter of a half an hour. And I called the officers on their cell phone. They come up into the living room, and they had the conversation, And I think, Mom was being who she is. I mean, she has guests, but she's also trying to buy time. She offers them coffee, she goes out to the kitchen, and, I'm sure the wheels are turning. She's trying to think, how do I deal with all of this? And she comes back, and, the agents begin asking her, saying, Mrs. Kaczynski, do you have anything that could help us carry the investigation forward? Anything like family photographs, letters your son has sent you? Maybe something typewritten your son might have sent you? They were especially interested in something typewritten because the manifesto had been produced on a manual typewriter. And at that point, Mom sent me to her closet. She had this big old wooden trunk. I don't even know if they make this kind of trunk anymore. But it was full of her relics of her two sons. It was her treasure chest. And so I remember dragging this out into the middle of the living room floor, opening the hood of it, and Mom getting down on her knees. And, as the agents, believe me, they had no search warrants, no legal right to do this. They were counting on her cooperation. They said, Mrs. Kaczynski, could we see this? Could we see that? And so she'd hand up a package of letters, and she had them all organized chronologically, and she'd, walk them through some family photograph albums. Pretty predictable what happens when you put a mother together with family pictures. What do? You get